Stay up to date on the latest political news this election season for less. Visit inforum.news/port and get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Subscribe now at inforum.news/port. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Plain Talk. Happy as always to be with you. And hey, one of the hottest debates is we're in the heart of campaign season right now. And of course you have all the candidates on the ballot and congressional candidates and legislative candidates and local issues and statewide issues. And one of the issues you're going to be voting on is term limits. And I think there's going to be a pretty hot debate about it. In fact, as I just shortly before I began recording this, I wrote a column about a group of most of North Dakota statewide elected officials, all people, by the way, whom the proposed term limits measure on the ballot wouldn't apply to, because it only applies to the governor and to legislative races. They all came out against it. Two of North Dakota's largest farm groups, the North Dakota Farm Bureau and the North Dakota Farmers Union, who, when I wrote about it in my column, I said they're kind of the Republicans and Democrats of agriculture policy. A lot of times they want to accomplish the same things and have very different ideas about accomplishing them. They both came out against term limits. But there was a very interesting voice, because a lot of people don't know this, but North Dakota already has term limits law on the books. Now, it's not enforced because the U.S. Supreme Court came down and said that it was unconstitutional, but North Dakota actually does have term limits for members of federal Congress, the senators and the congressmen. Now, it can't be enforced because, like I said, the Supreme Court ruled against it, but there was a gentleman in the 1990s who organized the ballot measure that put that law in the books. And that gentleman joins me. And it may surprise you to learn that this gentleman, Kent French, is actually against the term limits measure that's going to be on the ballot. Mr. French, welcome to the show, and so happy for you to take the time to talk with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell me, I guess the first question people got to be wondering is you obviously fought very hard to put the current term limits law in the North Dakota statute. Why are you against this ballot measure?
Well, because I did my homework. Prior to gathering any signatures, I had the petitions and everything ready to go, but you always want to be on the right side of an issue if you're going to push it. Not just the winning side, but the right side. And as I talked with lawmakers and I talked with people that are in government and asked them what kind of effect is this going to have? And that's a question that every North Dakota should ask themselves. What kind of effect is this going to have? What's going to happen to our government? And the people in North Dakota, I think today, as they look at this, and this group says they have about 80% of the vote. Well, I think they have that until the people of North Dakota really find out what's going to happen. One of the things and the reasons that I did not do term limits statewide is because we have the right of referral. If we don't like something the state government does, we can refer it. So we have that in place, and yet they're trying to change the system. And I don't understand why. Because if there is something that's obnoxious, something that people don't like, we will refer it. For instance, I've been on the ballot, I believe 6 times, only person in history, and I've won all 6. And I believe that that's the route the people should take, the right of referral, and not put lawmakers. I say this because this last week I talked with a lawmaker about this issue, and he's not a friend of mine. He's just a lawmaker that I know. And I asked him, what do you think about this? And he said, Kent, he said, I have been working on juvenile reform for about 7 years. And if this had been passed years ago, I wouldn't get it done. I'm not quite done with it yet, he said, but it takes a long time because a lot of things that these lawmakers do, it's not just state ideas and so on. They get these from other intelligent lawmakers around the country. They go to these different seminars, and this juvenile bill that he's working on apparently is a lot of dedicated work by a number of dedicated lawmakers, and that couldn't be done if we were to have this 8 years. Now, I'm not saying that I wouldn't go along with something if it was a longer period of time, but that's too short. It just doesn't make sense. One of the other things that I don't think that this gives the state the stability that we've had in the past. North Dakota is North Dakota. Hey, we're North Dakotans, and we have a lot of stability. Whether it's Republicans or Democrats, we, for the most part, think alike. And I believe that giving the term limits and pushing the term limits is going to have a little stability problem. And it also, what it does, I believe, it takes the lawmaker part of it and it gives to the bureaucrats. One of the worst things that I see in Washington, D.C. is the bureaucrats. And if you call Congressman, if you called Kent Conrad way back, which I did, and I talked with him about a problem, and now I'm talking with Senator Kevin Cramer about a problem, to a person, they all say, this is what we can do, but you got to remember, we're fighting the bureaucrats. You see, we don't run our country. We have a hand in it. And I don't want to give bureaucrats in North Dakota, and there's nothing wrong with our state employees. I love our state employees, and I'm not besmirching them, but it does give them more authority, and I do not like that.
And they don't ever have to appear on a ballot. I mean, they never get elected. You covered a lot of ground, and I thought you made a really interesting point. I mean, I think anybody who's ever, as a citizen, had an issue, whether it's something with, health insurance, or it's something with taxes, or whatever your issue is that you felt was important to you, hunting rights, I don't know what it is. Usually what happens is you end up finding a sort of champion for your cause in the legislature, or maybe a couple of them, I don't know. And I think to your point, the problem with term limits is if you find a champion, it may take multiple legislative sessions to get your issue fixed, right? Like maybe it's not successful the first time out. Maybe it's not possible to do all the things you need to do the first time out. Maybe it's going to take a series of bills because it's whatever the issue is. If you're champion, if somebody who just for whatever reason just gets your issue because they have personal expertise or you made a good connection with them, if they've already been in the legislature for 6 years and now they're the champion for your issue, your ability to see them through multiple sessions is going to be, by law, they can't run again. At least not in that chamber. Now, they can try to move across to the other chamber and run for another 8 years there, but there's no guarantees that they'll get in. There's fewer seats in the, half as many seats in the state Senate. So, I mean, that's a real problem where if you have somebody that you're working with, their ability, to be there is going to be hampered. And I don't know. And I thought the other really interesting point you made is the right of referral. I'm not a big fan of initiated measures to begin with. I don't like the idea of legislating at the ballot box, and I know you and I probably disagree on that. That could be a topic for a whole other show. But I really like referendums, and I like referrals. I like the idea that we have a veto. So if the legislature does something that's just like, oh boy, that's just way out of step, let's refer that to the ballot. We can do that, and I like that, and I will always support that. I also like the fact that we can recall. If a lawmaker just gets completely out of hand, we can recall them to the ballot. We can put them on the ballot again before their term's even up. As long as we have those things, I think to your point, we don't need term limits.
Exactly. And it's good we're having this conversation, but it would be better if we had this conversation where North Dakotans, a lot of them, could listen to it. And the reason I say that is because
well, a lot of them do listen to this podcast. I will tell you that.
Okay, well, coming from the 80s and the 90s, one of the most important things that I had to do when I fought the Center administration, and it was, it was battles. But why was it a battle? It was a battle because we had reporters. We had a lot of newspapers. We had a lot of and reporters at newspapers and radio stations. And thank goodness we have people like yourself, because general public, they don't get involved in this because they don't hear anything. You want to listen to KFYR today, or you want to listen to all you get's news feeds from the national. You're not getting the local stuff. You're not having a reporter go out and ask, oh, hey, you guys are pushing term limits. And I'm so happy that you're talking about term limits, because you've got 39 states that have term limits. But you know what? If I was doing my homework, I would find out that 39 states do not have term limits. That's false. It's 39 states that have term limits for governors. Okay? And only 15 states have term limits for legislators.
Let's speak to that for a minute, because the proposal that's on the ballot, it has a term limit for the governor, no more than 2 terms, 8 years. And by the way, only 2 governors in state history have exceeded 2 years. Former Governor William Guy and former Governor John Hoeven are the only 2 in history. And Hoeven ended up not finishing his last term because he was elected to the United States Senate. And then the other part of it is no more than 8 years in one legislative chamber for the lawmakers. Do you agree with the governor part of it? I mean, obviously, we when it's on the ballot, we don't get to pick and choose which parts we're going to approve. But do you think 8 years is appropriate for the governor?
Yes.
Okay, but 8 years is too short for lawmakers. That's your argument.
That's correct. And there's a big difference, because the lawmakers have to work at either passing laws or redirecting laws. They're the body that does the most work. The executive branch, and he has his staff and his people, and they watch over that, and they're up to speed on that stuff, but the work is being done by the lawmakers, and then they have to make a decision on whether what the bill is coming through is what they want and what the people in North Dakota want. Yes.
Do you? One of the arguments that I've found persuasive is there's a balance of power issue. Obviously, like the American conception of government is all about checks and balances, right? That Congress is a check on the presidency, the judiciary is a check on both. Congress can define the jurisdiction for the judiciary. There's all sorts of different ways that their powers overlap, and that the branches can kind of, in some instances, tell each other what to do. And so the idea is, what we get in the end is no single person or no very small group of people can just take over and do everything. And so what I'm thinking of at the state level is, we have lots of checks and balances now. The legislature is a check on the governor. The people have a check on the legislature, as you talked about referendums and recalls. We have all of these things. What I worry about is our legislature is already very restrained. They can only meet for 80 days in a 2-year cycle, a biennium. They're part-time lawmakers, which mean a lot of them have day jobs. They're not. This isn't their full-time job. And now we're going to limit to them to no more than 2 terms. I mean, I feel like 2 terms in one chamber. I feel like that's really going to set off where the executive branch is going to end up much more powerful than it already is. Do you agree?
I agree, and that's an extremely good point, because that goes back again to, if they're not there, and who's going to bring them up to speed? It's going to be the state employees. And once again, we love the state employees, but we do not want them to be running the state of North Dakota. That's why we have elected officials. And I do not believe that 8 years is enough time for those lawmakers to do a good job. I asked the question, and I don't know these people that are doing term limits. I'd like to know who funds them. I'd like to know who's backing them. So often in North Dakota now, because we don't have any media other than yourself and a few others, we don't have that kind of in-depth reporting. Who are those people out there? And if they're from another state, what's the real reason for doing it? Sometimes it's completely opposite of what you're thinking. And that's really scary. I do not want people from out of state, running North Dakota's government.
I can't, obviously nobody can tell you what's in another person's heart. But I've kind of wondered about who a term limits measure like this, because the timeline is so short, because it's going to promote so much churn in the legislature. And by the way, I should point out, we have, over the past 12 years, 70% of the, so that's 12 years, so that's 3-4-year terms. 70% of the legislatures have been turned over. 70% of the legislative seats have somebody new in them. I did it. The median number of years served in the current legislature is 8 years. The average is 10 years. So I guess part of me is looking at it like, where's the problem? I mean, it seems like the voter. I mean, obviously we have some examples of lawmakers who have been there for a long time, and hey, that's between them and their voters. The voters want to keep electing the same people. Who am I to tell them they're wrong? I don't live there. But on the other side of it, I'm also looking like I feel like the voters are already doing a good job of turning the legislature over and getting new people in there. I'm kind of looking what the problem is. And so part of me is thinking, well, who does it serve? And I look at the person who's sitting as the chairman. It's a gentleman by the name of Jared Hendricks from Minot. He has a political consultant firm, right? He runs campaigns for a living, and I'm thinking, well, who makes a lot of money if all of a sudden we have a lot more campaigns and we have a lot more churn in politics? I'm thinking it's political professionals who are going to make more money from this.
Could you give me that name again? Is it the guy from Minot?
Yeah, Jared Hendricks.
I don't get all that much involved in politics, but I wish that I would have known that I was going to do this interview before, and I would go back and look at that name, because somehow that name comes up to me. I just have a feeling that name has been involved in other things in North Dakota that are a little chaotic. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe I don't know that.
He's kind of an organizer of this Bastiat caucus in the legislature. He's one of those. He's a Republican district chairman in Minot, and I think that, again, this is probably a topic for a whole other show. We're all kind of aware of the split that's happening in the North Dakota Republican Party, and I would say that he's probably one of the people at the forefront of that political split in the Republican Party in the state.
That's okay. That answers a lot of my questions. That's chaos is happening around our country. And when you said we're doing a good job as voters, we are. We have a well-run state. Is it perfect? No. When that happens, we have the right of referral. But for a group of people to come in and want chaos, and I guess that's what I would call this, and not term limits, I'd call this chaos. I absolutely now I would like to take a real strong stand, knowing who and what's behind this movement. It is it's anti-North Dakota.
Do you feel? Let's roll back the clock a little bit. When I was talking to you and asking you if you wanted to come on and do this interview, you told me that your term limits measure in North Dakota for the congressional delegation, that it was the first in the country. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Tell me a little bit about the history, about how you came to pursue that.
Well, actually that came from the people. They wanted it, and part of it was because for many years we had one party in power, and Washington's a different animal as far as politics than North Dakota. When I met with the senators in Washington, D.C., I went down to learn how to run a senatorial campaign, and I spent a week down there with them. And at the end of the week, one of the people said to me, he said, Kent, the very first person that you're going to get on if you decide to run on as far as your staff is going to be your Pac-Man. That was the end of me ever thinking of going to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., we have great people there right now. And I'm thankful that we do. And it's important to me to make sure that people understand there's a difference between Washington, D.C. and North Dakota.
Well, I think the distinction you said were in the state, you can refer a law. In the state, you can recall an elected official, just about any elected official. In fact, I think the only elected officials in North Dakota we can't recall are members of Congress. And I think that's because the Supreme, as much as they ruled on term limits, they said the national constitution is what controls service in Congress. And again, that's a debate for a whole other issue. But that distinction you make, I think, is an important one. In North Dakota, you don't like your lawmaker, you can recall them to the ballot. You don't like a bill that they passed, you can refer it to the ballot.
It's exactly right. Yep. And believe me, people don't understand that people east of the Mississippi River do not have the same rights and laws. And even over in the western of the Mississippi, they're different, but we have better government because we learned from the mistakes that they made in the East. And the people that settled in North Dakota and came up with these laws, great people. And for us to change this, we better be correct in our thinking.
Well, Ken, I thank you so much for going on today. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I don't. I just wish that we had more reporters like you, people. And I'm serious about that because I did not know who was behind the this attempt to for term limits. And you really need to know where the money comes from and who's behind it, and then you'll find out what their motives are.
Well, so far, like I said, it's Jared Hendricks, but so many of these ballot measures anymore, it's a bunch of national money. They hire some local people, and they push their issue. And this one's not any different. I haven't looked recently, but the last time I checked, which was a couple months ago, for a while there, we didn't think this was going to be on the ballot. The Supreme Court kind of stepped in. There were lots of problems with the circulation process. A couple of our statewide officials maintain that there was fraud involved there. I suspect they're probably right. The Supreme Court, stepped in and found a technicality to get this thing on the ballot. But looking at, most of their money is coming from U.S. Term Limits, which is a national organization. And there's not a lot of money coming from actual North Dakotans. But, they're polling. North Dakotans like the idea of term limits. Although I think that's the thing. You made a very good point. You ask the average North Dakotan, do you support term limits? They're going to say yes. But how those term limits are designed is important. What's on the ballot is not the concept of term limits. What's on the ballot is a very specific piece of law that North Dakotans need to consider how that would impact the ability of elected officials to serve us and our ability to choose who we want on the ballot. I think that's the thing North Dakotans need to, and I don't know, maybe we'll get a surprise on Election Day. I guess we'll find out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.